So Ripley has just been released on Netflix, and this is the most recent adaptation of the book titled The Talented Mr. Ripley, which was released in the 1950s. Many of you will probably know the Matt Damon, Jude and Gwyneth Paltrow movie that was released in the 90s, which is also on Netflix at the moment. But this 8-episode series is the most screen time that we've ever had within this world. With Andrew Scott as Tom Ripley, this was a show that I had mixed feelings about before going into it, but I'll get into exactly what I thought during the video. So let's jump right on into it and break down all that there was to take away from Ripley. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The meaning of the statues and the paintings. One extremely prominent part of this series that got a large amount of screen time no matter what the location was the statues and paintings that would randomly get cut to during moments of movement. The same could also be said for animals, such as the cat that was present in the hallway. As I was watching the show, I spent a lot of my time wondering why it was that they were getting such a large focus, and then it was probably after a couple of episodes where I then realized what I took away from it. I felt as though even though Tom Ripley was fooling everybody that was around him, or at least trying to, the statues and artwork represented the fact that there were eyes that were watching him no matter what. Whether that be in the heart of Rome as he was trying to dispose of Freddy's body, the cat in the hallway, or just down empty alleys. When he thought he was alone, he never was. It's symbolic, but the facial expressions that were present on the statues as well, or the paintings, would connect to the acts that he committed. I also felt like a lot of the decisions behind the shots that were used connected to that too. For example, there would be shots like this where the camera may have been tucked around a corner or low to the ground, almost implying that he was being watched by somebody. And I think that represented us almost being like those statues or the burning eyes on the paintings just looking at him pass by, leading the lie and tricking everybody into thinking that he was Richard Greenleaf. I thought it was a cool creative choice that not only connected to the location that the series was set in, the artwork that was at the core of the show and amongst the characters, but it also provided a haunting edge to the killing that he was carrying out, and whilst he thought he was getting away with it and there were no eyes, that wasn't the case at all. The reveal during the ending. During the ending of the series, we saw that with Ripley having killed the real Richard Greenleaf in episode 3 and also killing Freddie Miles, with the police on his tail about the boat that was found and also presuming him to be the killer of Freddie, all whilst living his life as Richard Greenleaf. The final episode saw him going back to being Tom Ripley, as it was much simpler for him to become the person that was presumed to have been killed by Richard Greenleaf. I did kind of think that it was a bit foolish of the inspector to not recognize Ripley as the person that was pretending to be Greenleaf when he met with him, and he just had that wig and a beard stuck on his face. But I looked past it for creative reasons. With Tom going back to being his original self, Marge went to visit him, and whilst she was there, when she was looking for a needle and thread, she found Richard's ring inside of Tom's box. It very much felt like Tom was going to kill her in the exact same way that he killed Freddie. But once she revealed that she thought that Dickie giving the ring to Tom meant that he ended things for himself and probably did point the finger towards him being the killer of Freddie, Tom put the ashtray down and let her live. Tom despised Marge, and I feel him having to put up with her was just as much of an act as what it was for him when he was choosing to live as Richard Greenleaf. As we saw, he was contemplating killing her when she was on the edge of the canal, but he chose not to. Following the discovery of the ring, Tom met with Richard's father and also the private investigator from the first episode, and it was here where we saw what Tom's plan was. When he left the hotel and was acting disheveled, he was doing that deliberately because he knew that the police would go and speak to the hotel clerk. Plus, with the letter that he wrote to the landlady of his apartment when he was being Richard Greenleaf, where he essentially said how he couldn't live with what he did and that he didn't know what he was going to do with himself or where he was going to go. And with him also writing how she could also throw out his paintings because they were worthless. This was a dig towards Richard's father, and it was done to add a sense of guilt in there because his father never believed in him. It was following the letter where the PI came to the conclusion that when on the ferry out of Italy, something must have happened to Richard, and that he most likely ended things for himself, maybe by jumping off the edge of the ship. One thing that I thought was rather funny before this though was that there was a lot of speculation about what happened to Richard amongst the general public, and one of the people at the party said that they thought that the person who forged his signature killed him, which is quite literally what ended up happening, so it was dramatic irony at its best. Tom would only ever wear Richard's ring when he was the persona of Richard Greenleaf, and we saw that throughout the whole of the show. However, with Richard's father giving it to Tom at the end, he slipped it on and went back to living his life. Tom Ripley is an extreme sociopath on multiple levels. I don't think I've seen an example of a completely normal human being on the outside and then within their mind being so crazy and chaotic and then carrying out their sociopathic fantasies within reality as much as I have with this character. Tom wanted to be Dickie. He just wanted his life. He didn't care for him. I wouldn't even go as far as saying they were friends, but he just wanted the life that he led. The life that he knew he could never have unless he took matters into his own hands. Right at the end of the episode, we saw that Tom met with Reeves, who claimed he was an art dealer when they first met. However, in reality, Reeves was pretty much doing the job that Ripley did prior to moving to Italy. He could get a hold of false documents and create fake IDs for people. Ripley had an ID created under the name of Timothy Fanshawe, a new identity that he was going to be leading his life as. A package arrived at Ripley's and we saw that it was the Picasso painting that Greenleaf had in his villa, and as it hung on the wall, I finally understood the meaning of the painting. It represented Tom Ripley and the complexity of his mind. Each corner, edge, and section of the painting were parts of his plans that were unfolding, and they represented the different identities, different actions, and different motives that he had for doing what he did. Right at the end of the show, Inspector Ravini was given a book by Marge, the book that she'd spent the entirety of the series writing, and on one of the first pages there was a photo of the real Richard Greenleaf, and it was there where he had a moment of realization and that he'd realized he'd been fooled and that he'd never actually been speaking to the real Dickie. With an inspector that had a strong desire to solve crime like him, it most likely meant that he's going to go looking for Tom Ripley. Well, now, Timothy Fanshawe, if he is able to be found. Caravaggio's importance. The final episode opened up with us seeing the scene of a murder that was committed by Caravaggio in the early 1600s. His artwork featured a lot within the show, and it was artwork which Ripley felt a deep connection with, often hearing the voices of the subjects in the work. Caravaggio was a famous painter at the time that committed a murder in Rome and had to flee because the authorities believed that it was him that committed the killing. With the final shot of the opening section, and even the ending cutting between both the Roman painter and Ripley, and them both sitting in a chair, admiring art and drinking wine, both murderers, it showed the parallel stories and mindsets that the both of them shared, and the similarity in the events that they were experiencing. My review of the show. I thought this show was really good. I thought it elaborated on the film really well. I've not read the book, but I'd imagine this show covered way more than the film possibly could have in terms of understanding Ripley's mind that bit more. I thought it was shot absolutely beautifully. It's one of the best looking shows that I've seen on Netflix for some time. The thought behind the buildings that were used, the locations, the angles of the shots, the artwork, just everything. It was gorgeous to look at, all whilst having no colour whatsoever. I actually think this show would have worked really well as a one episode a week type thing. Each episode almost finished on a cliffhanger, and it really made you want to go into that next episode. But I feel as though that yearning for more would have been even greater if we were left waiting. So I do think it's a bit of a shame that it was all released at once, as it is quite a heavy story with lots of twists and turns along the way. I thought the cast all did a great job in their roles. Andrew Scott as Ripley was the perfect casting. Did I prefer his Ripley to Matt Damon's? That's something that I will need to think about. They were very similar, but also very different at the same time. Andrew Scott's one felt quite cold and reserved, and I think that worked really well with the character, whereas Damon's one was a bit more charming, so they were both good but in different ways. A standout character for me in this though was Inspector Ravini. I thought the character was just played so well. You could tell that he wanted to get to the bottom of the case and was frustrated with the other police forces. And then seeing him make that revelation at the end when he saw the photo of the real Richard Greenleaf in the book, where he didn't see what he did next, but you just know that he would have been filled with rage. One thing that I also quite liked about the show was the way that the subtitles were used. For example, when Tom Ripley first went to Italy and wasn't familiar with the language, the subtitles were in Italian. But as he learned the language, whenever Italian would be spoken, the subtitles would change to English. It almost allowed us to learn the language with him and experience his mind and what it was like to not understand anything when he first got there. There were some moments within this show which were absolutely brutal too, such as the boat scene and also when Freddy was killed. When Freddy was being dragged down the stairs and his head kept thumping, I felt like I could genuinely feel every single step. Plus, the whole boat scene was something which I thought was just really well executed too. The sheer panic when Tom fell off of the boat and had to get back on, and the fact that there was no dialogue that was spoken for such a long time, It just meant that we were there with him. It was a great decision, and it meant that we were even more immersed. I think this is a show that's definitely worth a watch. It's cool, creative, gripping, has some great performances, and from a stylistic point of view, it's really nice on the eye. It's a commitment, 8 hours, but it's one that has a great ending when you get there. So, there you have it, Ripley ending explained.